Okay, we're ready to start the Copic portion of this project, and I just wanted to show, this was my sample that I made. This is what we're aiming for to create as the image in the front of the card. So I just wanted to show that. I have a variety of products sitting here that are going to get used. First is that I went ahead and die cut a piece of Copic compatible paper. This is actually from Hammermill, using one of the Lawn Fawn small stitch rectangle stackables. So I did that in advance to save time. I also will be stamping it with Hero Arts Intense Black ink. That will be for the image. Ultimately, some VersaFine Clair for the sentiment. Some Versamark, because we're going to be golden heat embossing this little stamp down here. Get these out of the way. Of course, gold embossing powder. This one is by Stampendous. Some clear embossing powder, because I like to use it on top of pigment inks on sentiments. Embossing Buddy. And then a variety of stamps. I actually forget what the name of this one is, but I'll link it. This is the little gold, the scattered stars here. That's by 100 Proof Press. The scattered art is actually already in my Misti, which I'm going to be using for stamping. That one's as well. And then what we have is the featured image, which is from RubberMoon Stamps, and it's called Star Power. So let's move some of this stuff off to the side, and we'll get started. I'll keep that up there so we can see where we're going. What I've got here is my Misti stamping platform, which is what I use, because if you thought I'm a messy heat embosser, but I'm also a messy stamper. So I use this all the time. And what I'm going to do is take my pre-cut card, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in my Misti. The magnet there in place. Now, this stamp by RubberMoon, beautiful rubber stamp. It's mounted on a cushion. It comes with this acetate sheet that has the image. And I leave it in place. What I'm going to do is take some repositionable tape and put it on the acetate. I do this so that I have a rough idea of where the image is going to be, because since it's not a clear stamp, I'm not real sure about placement. So I'll put it up here, roughly where I want it, actually exactly where I want it to be. And then I'm going to close the door of my Misti, and that will adhere the stamp to the door. And now I can take my Hero Arts Intense Black ink, ink up the stamp. When I close the door of the Misti, okay, and then I have a nice impression. Now what I want to do is stamp this a second time, and that's the nice thing about using a stamp platform like this, a stamping tool, is because when I stamp it the second time, it'll still be in the exact same place. And there we have it. Take this out. I'll move this out of the way for right now. Okay, and so we'll get coloring. I have a variety of Copic markers, and I'll be showing them as I go rather than try and list them all here in the beginning. I have essentially a combination for what little skin is showing. I have a red combination, a blue combination, a green combination, a yellow combination, and a couple of gray markers for things like the tires. And if you don't have the exact same markers that I'm using, I'm trying to get rid of some shadows here. If you don't have the exact same markers that I'm using, it doesn't really matter. Just pick a color combination that works for what you have in your stash of markers. Okay, so I'm going to start with coloring the skin. That's the lightest part here on this. There's very little skin. What I'm going to take is my E000. I'm just going to put a little base coat on his face and on his hand. I'm going to take a little bit of E21 just to give it a little bit more depth. And that's it for skin. Okay, one part already done. Now, normally I would not do the red next when I color, mainly because you take the risk of pulling it into lighter colors as you color them. So for example, if I do the red right now, I take the chance of when I go and color the yellow that I'm going to accidentally pull that yellow into the red. I'm going to throw caution to the wind though, and I'm going to go ahead and do the red because since this is a larger area, I want to show you how I do ink blending, or one of the ways in which I do ink blending. And it's easiest to show you that on a larger area than one of the smaller areas like the wings or whatever. So I have three red markers. I have R24, R29, and R59. I have a light, a medium, and a dark. And what I'm going to do is start with my light, the R24, and I'm going to saturate the paper with that color in order to make the blending easier. It's easier to blend ink on top of ink, especially ink on top of wet ink, than it is to blend on top of dry paper. So that's why I start with saturating first. And just remember to turn your paper as you need to, so you can see where you're going, and it's also easier on your hand. Okay, I'll just finish up this area up here. Okay, so now I have a base coat. From here, I'm going to go to the dark. In this case, it's R59. And I'm just going to start sweeping in the R59 in the areas that I want ultimately to be the darkest parts. So I'm going to make the assumption that that's along the bottom of the plane. Come up the nose here a little bit, maybe, like that. Then I'm going to go to my medium, which is the R29. And what I do, the way that I was taught to do blending between colors, is to actually work on this wet edge. So work right here to get the two colors to blend. And you'll get that edge wet again, and then move forward. So I'm going to run it along here. I come on this side. I want to get this edge wet again. Get the blending working right here first. Turn my paper. And then move forward. And then I'll finish it off with the light, the R24. Okay, and there we have it. Now, I'd like it to be a little bit darker, a little bit more vibrant. So I'm going to go through these colors a second time. So here's my R59. You don't have to use as much this time because you already have a coat of all the colors. This will just help to deepen them up. Here's my medium. And I'm using that to help bring that color forward. Again, turning my paper as needed. And then I'll finish off once again with the light. Okay, and then I'm just going to let that dry. I'm not going to do any more blending with the red over that. If I see anything that I don't like about it after it dries, then I can go ahead and do a little bit of adjusting. But as it dries, you'll see the colors sort of blend together and essentially finish doing the blending. You have to let the ink do the work for you. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the yellow while that's drying. I have Y35 and Y38. And again, this is where I need to be careful. I'm going to base coat with my Y35 right here. But if I accidentally hit this, I could potentially pull that red into the yellow. So that's what I have to be careful about. That's why you don't usually do things like red first. But I wanted to use that as an example of how to blend. There's my Y38. And then going to base coat these little panels on the wings with Y35. Oops, use the 3/8. I'm going to flick down a little bit of Y38. Okay, and then I'll do these stripes here on the tail and the stars. So here's Y35 on the stars, and I'll base coat these on the stripes. Like that. I'll go to the Y38. Oops, just add a little bit into the stars. And here on the base. Okay? And there's our yellow. And I set the red to the side, but I forgot to do the stripes on the wings. So let me do that now real quick. Here's the the R24. Might as well add this in while I'm here. There's my base coat. Here's my 5/9. I'm just working out from that center. The R29. Just extend that blend out a little bit more. And then I'm going to finish with the R24. And that's where we are at the moment. I'm going to do my blue combination. I have B12, B24, and B26. So I'm going to take my B12 and I'm going to base coat this area on the wings. Okay, I'm going to do the flag separately, so let me get these areas on the tail. Okay, now I'll go to the dark. Here's my B26. Okay. 2, 4. Just extending that color out a little bit further. And then I'll finish with the B12. Okay, so that's the tail. And let's finish off the wings. So I'm going to take, I already have my base coat of B12, so I'm going to go to B26, and I'm going to run a line here down the wing. On each of these little panels. Take my B24 and just extend that out. These actually blend together pretty well. Red can be a hard combination. Sometimes even with blue, I'll have to go over more than once. But this combination seems to work pretty well. I can get the blending on the first try. And this is my light, the B12. Okay, so the wings are done. I'll come back to the flag in a moment. I'm going to take the B24 and I'm just going to run it along this little piece here that goes around the cockpit. I'm up on the tip of the marker because it's such a fine area that if you roll your hand and get up on the tip, then it's easier to get into a fine space. I'm going to take my N6 and I'm going to do the tires. Now you could use C6. I'm not sure why I pulled N. I don't know. Don't get to use it very often. And I'm going to go around the tires. Up on the tip of the marker. Okay, and then this little rod here, or whatever that is, that little support. And then the pole for the flag. Okay. I also have N2 I'm going to use on his helmet. So there's my base coat of N2. I'm also going to use it on the windshield right there. And I'm going to put it here in the back of the plane. The little panels that you see on the other side. And I'm going to take my N6 and on the helmet or the hat, whatever this is, I'm just going to add a little bit and at the base of the windshield. Go back to my N2 to blend it out. Okay. I have three greens. I have YG03, YG17, and YG67. I'm going to take my lightest color. I'm going to base coat his jacket. I'm going to take the YG17 and just run a little bit along the back, a little bit on his sleeve, and I'm blend the line out there a little bit. And then I'm doing this a little bit backwards, I suppose. I'm blending light to dark instead of dark to light. I'm going to take a little bit of the YG67. I sometimes blend light to dark instead of dark to light. Just if I'm uncertain how dark I want something to be. It's easier to make something darker than it is to make it lighter. So sometimes I actually blend light to dark instead of dark to light. Okay, so now we just have a little bit of finishing touches here, plus the flag. I'm going to take the Y38, do the propeller. I'm going to do the axle. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that for the moment. Okay, I'm going to try tackling the flag now. And I'm going to do the flag a little bit differently. Okay, so you see with the flag, we have a ripple going in it. So it's sort of undulating. Let me show you this again. So we have areas that are going to be dark and areas that are going to be light, and that's what gives us the illusion of the curve and the bend in the flag. So what I'm going to do is take my B12, my B12, I should say, marker, and I'm essentially going to map out what's ultimately going to be the darker areas in this flag, and that will help me with the shading. And this is going to have a dip right here. Okay, so these three areas that looks like I have a striped flag at the moment, but these three areas are the areas that are ultimately going to be the darkest part of the flag. And this just helps me, sort of guides me as I do the shading. I'm back to my B26, and I'm going to start adding in my color. And I want the darkest part to be here in the lowest part of the bend in the flag. I'll take my B24 and then start extending the blend in each direction. And then take my B12 and finish it off. Now, here I am going to go through the colors a second time. Here's my B26. B24. And my B12. Okay, I'm just going to let that dry. I'm going to take the B24 and I'm going to do the stripes here on his scarf. And there on his, whoops, right there on his goggle. Now, when I colored this the first time, I thought that these spokes were supposed to be like spindles, just sort of clear, so that you should have been able to see the back of the plane behind the wheel. And that's why on this one I extended that red so that it showed. And then I realized that probably what the artist intended was for these to be solid instead, so that you wouldn't have seen the back of the underside here of the plane behind them. So you could go either way. I kind of like what I did in the beginning and to leave these clear. So I'm going to start first with my R24 just to kind of map it out. draw that line in. And then take my R5 9 and finish it. May not have been what the artist intended, but it's sort of what I see. And now I'll just make that. Okay, so the Copic coloring is done. Move all these markers out of the way. And again, if you don't have these exact colors, obviously you can change them to whatever it is that you want. This was just the combination that I was doing. So what's next is to add the sentiment and to add the little stars here. So what I'm going to do is I have just a sheet of plain paper here. And here's my little stamp with the stars. I have some Versamark. I have some Detail Gold Embossing Powder by Stampendous. And I'm going to ink up my stamp. I'm going to use my embossing buddy just to cover this area. And then I'm going to lightly stamp my image. Which you can't see now because the ink is clear. Sprinkle a little embossing powder. Knock off the excess. I'm going to put this back in the jar. Okay. Give me a moment to get my heat gun. Now, what you want to do with the heat gun is that you want to get it good and hot before you want it to get it good and hot before you point it on the paper, because the paper is going to warp from the heat. So I let it run for a minute or so. And then you do from the back a little bit. And now I'm going to emboss and melt the gold embossing powder. Okay, and then there's that little trail of stars that you saw in my original. And then I'm going to pull my Misti out again. Sentiment already in place here on the bottom of my Misti. So I'm going to put this back in. Try and pick up the magnet. And this time I'm going to use VersaFine Clair. I like this for sentiments. It's a fine pigment. And I like it because it gives great detail on sentiment stamps. And I'm sorry because I'm going to heat emboss this. Let me do this real quick. Stamp it. Get this out of the way. And what I'm going to do now is put clear embossing powder on that. It helps to seal the pigment ink, which is slower to dry. And it just gives it a little bit of dimension. course, I missed entirely. To clean that up. Just move this out of the way. Told you I was messy. Okay, and now the image is done. In the next part, we'll finish off the background and put the card together. I'll be right back.